Hello friends, Corey Hawkins here, and I'm back with some fall gardening information for you. First, I want to thank everybody who submitted questions. When you're trying to provide useful information for people, it really helps to know what they need to know. So thanks for taking the time. I appreciate it. I am going to be going over a lot of stuff today, just like a little bit of a lot of stuff. So my guess is it'll leave more questions than answers. Feel free to comment below or send me a message, questions that you have. My intention is to keep making these videos, so knowing what you need covered in the future is definitely helpful for me, so please do not hesitate. All right, here's the gist of what we're going over today. Talk a little bit about what you've got going on in your vegetable garden, maybe some plans you can make for the immediate future, but mostly focused on things for next year. Talk about what's going on in your landscape, so thinking about your trees and your shrubs and your perennial plants and decorative plants. We'll talk about those. We'll go over lawn care specific to Pacific Northwest, because a lot of what I'm going to say is going to be specific to the Pacific Northwest. That's really And then lastly, we'll talk about cleanup and things you can be doing to take care of your soil right now. So let's get started. What's going on in your vegetable garden? So you have 3 crops that relate to weather in your garden. You have warm weather crops, you have cold weather crops or cool weather crops, and then you have crops that you can overwinter. So starting with your warm weather crops, they're basically crops that like to grow when it's warm, meaning 75 degrees or more. Some warm weather crops actually prefer much warmer, like 85, 90 degrees. And if you live in the Pacific Northwest, you know that those days are few and far between. And there's things that you can do to help yourself out in that respect. Warm weather crops are going to be things like tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, cucumbers, zucchini, melons, squash, pumpkins. There's a whole bunch more, corn. I just can't think of them off the top of my head, but if you Google warm weather crops, you'll find lists. Those crops have pretty much come to an end at this point. Usually once the temperatures start to get consistently under 70 degrees, your warm weather crops are going to start being less and less productive, or what they're doing is just going to slow down substantially. And your goal should be to focus on helping those plants ripen what they've already created and stop them from creating anything else. So there's 2 things you can do at this point in time, but ideally they should have been done like a month ago, like at the beginning of September, sorry. So the first thing you can do, it's accessible to everybody, is prune your plants. Pruning just refers to taking off parts of the plant that it no longer needs so that it can put energy into ripening the produce that it's already created. You can Google how to prune, fill in the blank. If you are pruning tomatoes though, you want to be specific to how to prune a tomato at the end of the season, or how to prune a tomato to ripen fruit. Because there's other reasons to prune tomatoes. At minimum, you want to go out and just take off the flowers off your plant. So if you still have flowers on your tomato plant and if your tomato plant is still looking good, just at minimum go pick the flowers off. Leaving the fruit on the vine will help it ripen as long as rot doesn't become an issue. So it is a fine line that you walk this time of year between leaving things on the vine to ripen and leaving them out to rot. So just keep an eye on things. Next year though, remember, like end of August to the end of September is the window of opportunity for pruning back your warm weather crops to help them ripen their plants. The other thing that you can do, and it's probably also too late in the game for this now, but planning ahead for next year, is incorporate season extenders into your garden. Google season extenders, and things like hoop houses and row covers and cold frames are all going to come up as potential season extenders. And depending on the crop that you're growing will depend on what season extender works better for you. Season extenders do several things. So basically a season extender is like a little portable greenhouse, kind of. It doesn't work as dramatically as a greenhouse does. It may only heat up the temperature inside of itself by a couple of degrees, or heat up the soil temperature below it just a couple of degrees, but that couple of degrees could make the difference. It means that you can put your plants in earlier in the year, so you don't have to wait necessarily until Mother's Day to plant your tomatoes. You can put them in maybe a week or two earlier. The sooner your plant gets established, the sooner it will start producing. Then you can use it at the end of the season when when it gets like this, when the temperatures start dropping, when the rain increases, because these plants, a lot of these warm weather plants like a lot of water, but they don't like to be wet. So as we let them get wet, they become more susceptible to rot. So it's a combination of temperature and moisture that ends up doing them in. So you can actually use your hoop houses both to keep the plants warmer and to keep the plants drier at the end of the season. The other thing that they do is they keep the whole temperature throughout the whole summer warmer. So when when we have mild summers that are 76 degrees, I am not complaining about the weather, except that it makes it hard to grow things. So if you utilize a hoop house to make your tomato beds warmer, to make your pepper beds warmer, you'll get way more 90-degree days that way. So season extenders, hoop houses are the bomb here in the Pacific Northwest. If you don't have one, think about getting one. I will take a walk out into my yard, into my garden. It's a mess out there, but I think next week or maybe the end of this week, I'll go take a walk out there with you guys and show you what I've got going on. It's a disaster. It'll make you feel better about yourself as a gardener. So there's that. So moving on to the cooler weather crops. Whew. Cool weather crops like it cool. They can grow at temperatures as low as 40 degrees and up to probably 65-ish. Once we start getting above 70, 75 degrees, the cooler weather crops start to fail. They start to want to flower, and then they want to start to set off seeds, and that's failure of a cool weather crop if you're growing it for harvest. Types of cool weather crops, most root vegetables, so radishes, beets, carrots, leafy greens, lettuces, spinach, brassicas, so kale, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, cabbage. These are all cooler weather crops. You can plant them much earlier in the year, so you can plant them in at the beginning of spring for a summer harvest. And you can plant them at the end of summer for either a fall harvest or for a spring harvest. I still feel like I got something in my teeth, but I'm not gonna worry about it. Okay, that's why I keep doing that. I'm not gonna edit this because I've done it a million times. Shit. Okay, where was I? Okay, so unfortunately it is too late to plant from seed for your fall harvests or for your overwintering crops. You might be able to find starts of some things, but for the most part, we're outside of that window. Let's talk about cool crops versus overwinter crops. And I said, what were all of the cool crops? Well, of those crops, some of them can tolerate being overwintered. You have like a spectrum of cool crops. You've got tender cool crops, which are gonna die when the frost comes or when they freeze. And then you've got the more hardy cool crops that will last throughout the winter. Your faster growing cycle plants tend to be more tender. So when you plant them in September, they will be ready to harvest probably about now. And you'll be able to harvest them up until you get our first frost. Or if you cover them with row covers and protect them from the frost, they will continue another 4 weeks or so beyond that until we freeze. So the first frost is due, thanks to the Farmer's Almanac, I know this. The first frost is due on November 16th. And then I can't remember when the first freeze is, usually at least a month later. So, by covering that crop, so that is something that you can do for your cool crops. By covering it, you can make it last to the first hard freeze. Now, with plants that are on the hardy side, the ones that you can overwinter, those tend to be like the root vegetables. So carrots and beets, and then Brussels sprouts, cabbage, kale, the brassicas. Those are all pretty hardy. They will grow if you plant them in September. you're not going to be able to harvest those until spring, because those are a longer season crop. Oftentimes, even in the summertime, you know, your Brussels sprouts are going to be like a 3-month crop. They're going to take 3 months to fully mature, but since you're growing them in the winter, they're going to take 6 months. So anything that takes 2 or 3 months in the summer is going to take twice that growing in the winter. But there's benefits to growing in the winter. One is that you have no bugs. There's no bugs, because the biggest problems that these crops have are pests. So mites and aphids and slugs and gross things. Slugs can be a little bit of a problem now while the temperatures are still warm, but once it gets cold, you're not going to see slugs again until spring. So my friend Emily asked me about how to deal with mites on, I think she said Brussels sprouts. Fortunately, Emily, it's not going to be much of a problem for very long, because those mites are going to have a hard time living as the temperatures keep going down. But right now, what I would do if I were you is I would spray them with neem oil. Neem oil is a plant derivative. I think it is a nut or a berry, but it's, you know, the oil is pressed out of a plant. It is consumable. You can put it on your skin. You can ingest it. You can do all kinds of things with neem oil. It's very safe. But it's also an insecticide, and how it works is, its mechanics is that it suffocates the pests. And it also, if the pest has laid eggs, it will suffocate any emerging babies. So, and then once all of your little critters are dead, you can clean it off. It might require some soap and water to clean it off, but that's one way to deal with it. If you do use neem as a regular way of managing insect pets, it's something that you do have to reapply pretty regularly, but it's very safe, and you can use it to the time of harvest. Hopefully later in spring, or earlier in spring, I will most likely put out something about dealing with pests like aphids, and also how to utilize row covers to keep certain types of pests away. So look forward to that. The other benefit to growing overwintered root vegetables is, I haven't done it myself because I usually do something else during the winter. I'll talk about it in a little bit. But the root vegetables tend to be sweeter. So I've heard that overwintered carrots are the bomb. So, you know, if you can do it, do it. You do want to, when you're looking at, sorry, I have a packet of seeds here. When you're looking for seeds to overwinter, you want to specifically make sure that they can be overwintered, because this is kale, for instance. It's called winter boar, so guess what? It lives in the winter. Gardening with its plain and simpleness. I love it. Yeah, this says, where did I see it? One of the most winter hardy kales. And so even within carrots, there's going to be carrots that are varieties that are better for overwintering. So when you're picking out carrots or beets or anything that you intend to overwinter, make sure that you look on the packet and see if that overwintering is part of its description or is one of its characteristics. All right, so let's move on to your landscape. The biggest things in your landscape are most likely trees and shrubs. It's probably what you have an abundance of. Now is the time to consider whether or not you need to prune your trees or shrubs. I'm not a good resource for that. I know people, so I could refer you to someone, or I could refer you to, you know, a couple of books that might be good, but pruning is not my jam. But I do know that for most plants, most trees and shrubs, fall and spring are the best times to prune. I do also know that there's 2 reasons to prune. So you either prune to reshape something or resize something, or you prune to have that plant create more flowers, or if it's a fruit tree or whatever, to have it create more fruit. So you need to go out into your yard and be like, what do we got? If you've got a fruit plant, for instance, you've got apple tree, you know, and you're like, I want more apples, then Google how to prune an apple tree for more apples, or when to do that, because it's either now or it's spring. So go figure it out. Or, you know, if you've got rhododendrons, it's too big. How do I reshape my rhododendron? How do I make my rhododendron smaller through pruning? And there's going to be videos, I guarantee you. But definitely now is the time to be thinking about that. The other thing you have going on in your garden probably are perennial plants or decorative plants or plants that grow from bulbs and tubers, flowers and such. For the most part, they should be looking pretty rough right now. Many plants at this point in time are still gathering energy for the winter and to get themselves started next year. So as long as there's green on those plants, they are still pulling in energy and storing it. You have plants like dahlias and I can't think of it off the top of my head. Those bulb plants, other bulb plants that actually need to be killed by the cold. It's called vernalization. When plants fertilize properly, they produce more flowers the next year. So if you cut them back too soon, you are stunting their growth for the next year, at least as far as flower production is concerned. That was hard to get out. I will be doing a video specific to cutting back perennials and how to deal with tubers or bulbs if you're going to be digging them up, and how to take care of that in November. I'm not exactly sure when in November because I want to wait for my plants to be ready for it. You might have like things like geraniums. I have an addiction to geraniums. I got this little guy I dug up the other day. Those you can all start looking at ways to overwinter. I'm going to do a video on that too coming up, so you know it's coming. How you can bring in your tender annuals, how you can keep them in your house, how you can propagate and make more of them. That's coming up. But start looking around your garden and thinking, oh, like, what is this flower? If you don't know, if you got flowers, you're like, I don't know what this flower is. Look it up. You might be able to bring it inside and salvage it and save yourself some money for next year and have a little indoor garden, or, you know, I don't know. Okay, let's talk real quick about your lawn, specifically to Pacific Northwest lawns. Now is the time. So fall and spring are our major grass growing seasons. Now, if you want to overseed your lawn, if your lawn has sparse spots, or if you just want to, you know, improve your densities, now would be a good time to overseed your lawn. Another phenomena that's specific to Pacific Northwest lawns is moss. Moss is a big problem in our area for 3 reasons. We've got moisture, we have darkness, and we have very acidic soil. Moss thrives in acidic soil. So what you got to do is make it an inhospitable environment by making the soil less acidic. And you can do that by adding lime. Lime is sold all over the place. You can get it at almost any home and garden store. You know, garden lime is going to most likely have specific instructions for the purpose of making your lawn less acidic. So if you make your lawn a less hospitable environment for moss, it's not going to be as prolific. Grass actually prefers soil that's less acidic, so it's going to flourish. So that it creates that balance where that moss isn't able to take hold and that grass is then able to go back and reclaim its space. Now is a good time to fertilize. I don't have any particular fertilizers that I would recommend. I don't fertilize my garden, my lawn, and I don't use weed killer on my property at all. What I have done in the past is overdressed my lawn with, there's a bunny out there, my lawn with compost. So overdressing means you just add a layer on top of things. So it's not pretty. It is not, it is like 2 or 3 weeks worth of fairly unsightly business. You don't want to walk on it. It's messy. I had a problem with my lawn space, the space that I keep grass on purpose, that it was extremely compact, and the dirt that was there was crap dirt. It's like when they came in to build this space, they just, you know, scraped off all the good stuff and took it somewhere else and left us with this hard pan crap. It's horrible, horrible soil. And even if we tried to aerate it, it was just like taking chunks, plugs out of like concrete. It was terrible. So 2 years in a row, I did a top dressing of compost, and like it was messy and it was unsightly, but the improvement of soil structure has been remarkable, and my grass has been exceptionally healthy. So I think that I'll do that again this spring. It's made the biggest difference. And like, it was not the most fun process. It was a lot of work, but the results have been outstanding. And like, my grass actually has, you know, that kind of like cushy feel, like when you walk on grass, instead of like, it was like walking on concrete. It was horrible. So anyway, that's what I recommend for fertilizer. If you do use a fertilizer. My request whatever, is that you use one that's got low phosphorus. Phosphorus is a problem in our area because we have so many connected waterways, and phosphorus goes through the runoff, storm drains, gets into various bodies of water, and is responsible for creating algae that is not supposed to grow in such abundance. And so it ends up killing fish and wildlife. So if you can avoid phosphorus, that's great. If you are all for going green, then I highly recommend a top coating of compost. Okay, let's talk about cleanup. You don't have to do it. You're welcome. Actually, there's really no benefit to doing cleanup, except that it looks good. And I'm not going to discount aesthetics. I get it. When it's messy, it drives me crazy. So what I've done in the past is my vegetable garden, I go in and cut things down at the very level of the soil and just lay them all down nice and flat and neat and stuff and orderly. The reason I've done that is because leaving things in place is great for the soil. It creates decomposition, which compost, it feeds the soil, it protects the soil, which I'll explain in a second. And it leaves like seeds and things that were in the plants. Like I've got sunflowers that I would just lay down and then the birds would come and eat the seeds. It was very symbiotic with nature and stuff. But there's a couple of things that you need to consider with your soil, and it kind of goes hand in hand with how you clean up, okay? So your soil health is based on two things. And I'm not going to get too deeply into this because I could do a whole like hour-long conversation about soil, which I don't want to do. But having a good structure to your soil and having a good amount of nutrients in your soil, it's important. So first, what is soil structure? Good soil structure is when there is, the right balance of matter in your soil that allows for water to penetrate the surface, come into the soil, be held into the soil just right, and then also be able to drain off properly. So it's a real fine balance of letting the water in, holding just enough water for the plants, and letting the water drain out. If you have compacted soil, what happens is, either the water can't penetrate the surface, or the water does penetrate the surface and gets stuck and is boggy. Like let's say you have a layer of loose dirt and then compact soil underneath here. You're gonna retain a lot of water in this section. I had this happen this year. I can talk about that another time, but your structure, how your soil deals with the water that comes in, the kind of space that your soil creates, like, can the worms get through it? Can the bugs get through it? So you want it loose enough that, things can work their way through there, but you want it firm enough that your plants will stay in place. So there's a fine balance to your structure. What happens to your soil structure if you leave your soil bare and unprotected is that the elements come in. Like the other day, we had massive rain. It was raining hard, but a hard rain will start to pack soil down. What if it snows? The weight of that the weight of that snow will pack your soil down. So if you have some kind of buffer between the elements and your soil that will take that, that energy and keep your soil nice and fluffy, your soil is going to be healthier. So how does that relate to cleanup? Whew, gotta come around full circle. When you clean up, keep this in mind. So if you've got piles and piles of leaves, are there places in your garden where you can put those leaves where it's going to protect the soil? So if you've got, raised vegetable beds, put a nice layer of leaves on top of those. If you've got even flower beds or around your trees and stuff, you can just kind of clean up your leaves. You don't have to pick them all up. Any plant matter that you can leave behind is not only going to protect that soil, but it's going to feed it. It's going to break down into nutrition for all the microbes in the soil and eventually for your plants. So consider that when you're cleaning up. But if you're, you've got beds, like I know a lot of landscape beds aren't going to look good if you're just leaving all your debris around. So if you clean up those beds, I would definitely recommend putting in a fertile mulch. Put down something that is going to protect your soil. Don't leave it bare. Okay, I think that was a lot of stuff. If you have any questions, please feel free to comment or send me messages. I'm going to leave you with just one last thing, or two last things, a couple of fantastic resources that I enjoy. So the Farmer's Almanac, I use the Farmer's Almanac every year. I don't have to take it out very often, but it's got some good information about gardening. The first frost and the last frost, and what to plant by moon cycle, which I think is pretty cool. Plus, the Farmer's Almanac has been around 200 years, and I really like what they're doing, so they can have my 20 bucks every year. Even if I didn't crack this book open, I'd feel good about giving them money, but I do crack this book open. The other resource is this Maritime Northwest Garden Guide. It is put out by the Seattle Tilth, which is, they're in King County. They are a wonderful organization that is dedicated to the education and outreach of gardening and culture or horticulture information. They're fantastic. This book is amazing. It is not very big, but it breaks down by month and talks about like all the things you can be planting or can't be planting. Well, it doesn't say can't plant because that's not how they roll, but you know, sow indoors, sow outdoors. It's like what you should be thinking month to month, and it's specific to the Pacific Northwest. That is really hard to say. Anyway, okay, so that is a great resource. I highly recommend you get it. Support the Seattle Tilth. Another great resource is your county's Master Gardeners program. The Master Gardeners program is sponsored by, every state has it, every county has it. Usually one college in every state has what's called a land grant. It's given by the government. It's usually the college in that state that focuses on agriculture or horticulture. And in exchange for the use of that land, these colleges, so in Washington, it's Washington State University, these colleges sponsor extension programs that, you know, that put on these Master Gardeners programs. And the purpose of the program is community education and outreach as it relates to home gardening. So use that resource. You can find them online. You can call them. They are just such helpful people. So I was a trained Master Gardener. I no longer volunteer as Master Gardener. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to tell you that I won't use pesticides. That's a whole thing. But anyway, so those are some resources for you. Again, I can't wait to answer the rest of your questions. I appreciate you watching. I hope everybody does good, is doing well. Take care of yourself, take care of your plants, and be well.